First of all, welcome to Pipefy's Advanced Features Field Conditionals webinar. My name is Isabel. I'm a product content specialist here at Pipefy, and today I'm going to present to you guys our brand new feature called Field Conditionals. This feature was released just last week. This presentation is going to be divided into two parts. First, I'm going to give you guys a brief overview about what this feature is, what it does, and then we're going to move on to setting field conditionals up. The field conditionals feature enables users to hide or show fields in their pipes form and phases based on the information added to other fields. So basically what it does is that based in the answer you give in one field, it's going to condition what happens to the other fields, either in your form or your phases. So for example, if you have a list of reasons for your customers requesting support and you have the others option, you can create a field condition that only when they click on others, a short text field called other reasons will be displayed so they can input the reason. This feature is currently available only for users in the business and enterprise plans, and it can only be set up by the Pipes admin users. There are many situations in which field conditionals can be used to make your process more dynamic and more practical to use. The first case, and one we're hearing a lot about right now, is to skip or hide mandatory fields. So let's suppose you have mandatory fields in a phase or your form that are only mandatory in certain situations, so depending on the answer given in other fields. If you use field conditionals to hide those fields in those specific scenarios, you're going to be able to move cards forward without filling in those fields, even though they're mandatory, because when they're hidden, they're not considered mandatory. Second case is to create scenarios to show or hide fields. For example, if you have, one of the cases we're going to demonstrate is that you have a form in which you have a phase in which you only want people to input information for a meeting after the meeting has been held. So you're going to ask them, did you meet with the customer? And if they say yes, you're going to show fields they need to fill after the meeting has been held. Third is to increase the complexity of your form or phases so you can make them more dynamic by creating scenarios to display these or those fields. So you no longer need to have a single long field form for people to fill in. You can create different varieties of the same form by using field conditionals. And fourth, but not least, is to make forms or phases more compact. So you can choose to only display fields in certain scenarios, making your forms and phases much more compact and easier to navigate in. We're going to present a few use cases to demonstrate how this feature works. And the first use case we're going to present is a purchase approval. This one we're going to set up together. So we have a field, a connection field that used to create approval requests in a secondary pipe, but it only needs to be used when the purchase value is above $500. So whenever the value is less than $500, this field is going to be hidden in your form. The second one, we've created a partner registration process in which people can choose to begin with. They can choose whether they're a company or an individual consultant. And upon them choosing those options, we're going to display some specific registration fields based on the answer they gave on this first field. Third case is the dependents. So we're going to show or hide fields in our employee onboarding form depending on the answer the employee gives in two fields, asking them whether they have dependents for their health insurance, such as spouse or kids, and how many dependents they have. Fourth example is going to be our sales pipeline, which I mentioned about the meeting phase. So we're only going to show fields after the user confirms that the meeting has been scheduled and then after he or she has met with the customer. Then we're going to move on to the help desk case, in which we only show specific fields for each of the support motives we have in our form. And the last one is showing groups of products by selecting categories and subcategories of each type of product. So let's suppose you have an e-commerce, and each of your products has specific categories or details people need to fill in after they select the product. So if I select a shirt, I want to know the color of the shirt, the brand of the shirt, the size of the shirt, etc. So all these values are going to vary depending on which product you choose. So the first scenario we're going to talk about is the purchase process I mentioned. So we're going to come here, open our purchase process. For this process, we have a simple form, which we can open by clicking here, in which the person adds their name, what needs to be purchased, the price of the item they're purchasing. Then they create the approval request. You can see here that I've specified that purchase of over $500 must be approved, and then email and urgency and additional detail. We're going to create our field conditional by clicking here on these three dots and then on setup field conditionals. We're going to call our scenario. The first step is giving the scenario a name. So we're going to call purchase approval request. Then we're going to set up our scenario. So we only want this conditional to happen if the price here is greater than 500. After we establish the conditional, we're going to roll the screen down and establish what we want to happen if the conditionals are true. So we want to show approval request. And if the conditionals are false, so if the value is less than 500, we want to hide the approval request. So we want to show approval or hide approval depending on the value of the purchase. You just hit save here and it's saved. So we're going to move on to our form. I'm going to open it on our public form. The public form is very useful if you have processes such as the purchase process that need to be accessed by everyone in your company, but they don't need everyone to be a member of this process. So I'm going to fill in the information here. And then I'm going to add the price here. You guys can see that after I filled in the price, it opened down the approval. If I change it for $99.99, it hides. Then you guys can see here that the approval field is mandatory, but if we add a value that hides it, we can create the card without filling in that information. The second example we're presenting here is the partner registration process I mentioned you guys. This is a more complex scenario, so the setup is going to be a little different. Let me first show you guys the form. You can see that initially you can only see this field here. The same happens in the public form. So we have the form here on our screen, and the first step is choose whether it's a company or an individual consultant. I'm going to choose a company, and it shows the fields I've created for the company details. And if I come over here and change it to individual consultant, it changes the fields that are displayed. So this way, we can actually have two separate forms for the same pipe. Now I'm going to show you guys how I set up those conditionals. So we come here, set up field conditionals, and you guys can see that we have three different scenarios. I'm not going to use the same option that if the condition is true or the condition is false, because I have three different scenarios. I want something to happen when the field is blank, something else to happen when the person selects company, and something else when they select individual consultant. So let's check them out. So let's suppose that if this field, choose one of the options, is blank, so if conditionals are true, I want to hide all the fields for company and individual consultant. And in this case, I'm not going to use if the conditionals are false, because I'm going to add those scenarios in other conditionals. Then we'll move on to the company scenario, in which we're going to show some fields and hide other. So if choose one of the options is equal to company, I'm going to show company name, federal tax ID, phone and mobile, and I'm going to hide name, date of birth, and social security number. And the individual consultant is the opposite. So if the field choose one of the options is equal to individual consultant, I'm going to show name, date of birth, social security number, mobile, and phone, and I'm going to hide company name and federal tax ID. So in this case, as I mentioned to you guys, since we have three different scenarios, so field is blank, company, and individual consultant, we need to create one conditional for each scenario. In this case, we're going to leave the if conditionals are false part blank because we're going to cover that in the other scenarios we create. Our employee onboarding scenario is a little bit different because, let me open here the form, because we created two conditions that show or hide fields in a sequence. So the first question I ask is whether the new employee has any dependents. So spouse and children are considered legal dependents. So let's suppose I say no, nothing happens. It just hides the field. But if I say yes, it's going to open a second field asking how many dependents. So let's suppose I have one, my spouse only. So it's going to show here the name of dependent number one, the date of birth, and the social security number. Or if I have my spouse and one child, I click 2 and it opens 1 and 2, 1 and 2, and 1 and 2 here. If I move back to 1, it hides the second dependent's field. So now here you can see that we have the first condition that is related to that first field in which we ask whether the employee has or doesn't have dependents. So we created a conditional if the scenario below happens. So if do you have any dependents is equal to yes, we're going to show the how many option here. But if the conditionals are false, we're going to hide how many, hide all the information for dependents number 1 and 2. Then we created the 3 scenarios we created for the previous automation, the previous conditionals here as well. So we have one for when the dependents field is blank, in which we want to hide all the fields for both dependent number 1 and 2. So if how many is blank, we're going to hide name, date of birth, and social security number for dependents number 1 and 2. And here we didn't add any if the conditionals are false because they're going to be covered by the next 2 field conditionals. Then we have a scenario for when the person selects 1 in the how many dependents they have. So how many is equal to 1. We're going to show dependent 1, show date of birth, and show social security, all the info for dependent number 1, and we're going to hide the information for dependent number. And last but not least, if the person has 2 dependents, we're going to show all the information. In this case, we could create more conditionals for more dependents. So if we had 3, 4, 5, we would keep on going by only showing the fields we want to see for a certain number of dependents. For our customer support requests, we also use a public form. You guys can see that our public forms are all customized. You can choose all this information you see on the screen. You can upload your logo and select the background image and customize this information here and the text in the button. So we have a very short form here asking the customer for name, email, and then we have a drop-down menu in which they can select why they're asking for help. So let's suppose I have a question. When I select this, it displays what's your question and can you provide further detail. If I select I have a complaint, it changes. You guys can see that it changes for what's your complaint. If they select that something's wrong with their payment, we have another drop-down menu in which they can select the reasons here. I could create a second conditional. So if they selected other, it would open another short text field for them to input the reasons. So, and then if they have a suggestion or others, so what's wrong? We want to know what's wrong with them. In this case, we created quite a few field conditionals. So we created the first scenario for when the field is blank. So it only shows a short field on the screen. Then one for question, one for complaint, one for payment, one for suggestion, and one for other. I'm going to quickly go over these scenarios to show you guys how we set that up. So the blank scenario, we established that if the scenario below happens, so if the field, how can we help you, is blank. So whenever the person just opened the form, we're going to hide all those fields that refer to the other reasons. So what's your complaint? What's wrong with your payment? What's your suggestion? Can you provide further detail? What's your question and what's wrong? In this case, we don't need to add if conditionals are false because all our scenarios cover the false for this scenario. Let's suppose our user has a question. So here, if the field "how can we help you" is equal to "I have a question," we're going to show what's your question and can you provide further detail, and we're going to hide all the rest of the field. It's very important that you remember to set up the fields you want to show and the ones you want to hide. So you need to set the entire scenario up so you're going to show only the fields you want to see. If they select payment, we're going to establish that if "how can we help you" is equal to "something's wrong with my payment," we're going to show what's wrong with your payment and can you provide further detail, and we're going to hide all these other fields here. The same goes for suggestion. If we removed all those conditions, they would see all the fields in the same form. So we have a lot of fields that are hidden or displayed just so we can make our form more intuitive for the person filling it. So if "how can we help you" is equal to "I have a suggestion," we're going to show what's your suggestion and can you provide further detail, and we're going to hide what's your question, what's your complaint, what's wrong with your payment, and what's wrong. And again, last but not least, if "how can we help you" is equal to "others," we're going to show another short text field asking what's wrong, can you provide further detail, and hide all these other fields. If we come here and open our start form setting, you guys can see that we have all these fields in our form. They're just hidden or displayed according to the scenarios we set up. So you're going to need to create all the fields you want to show or hide in specific scenarios and establish that with the field conditional. And last but not least, we have the sales pipeline scenario in which we created field conditionals, not in our form, but in a phase of our process. So here I'm going to open this card in which we're negotiating with Visa. You can see that's currently in the meeting phase, and I have a single question in my field, my phase. Was the meeting scheduled? If I say no, nothing happens. But if I say yes, it's gonna drop down these options. So I'm gonna say that the meeting was yesterday, and then did you meet with the customer? If I say no, nothing happens. But if I say yes, it's gonna drop down all these fields. So the meeting summary and the deal value and when will the next meeting be. So I have the option of clicking here again and hiding the fields if I say no, and that information in the fields is not lost. So if I already have some information in these fields, it's not going to be lost. It's just going to be hidden. To set up conditionals in your phases fields, you're going to come right up here, click on the three dots, and then set up field condition. You guys can see that we have two scenarios. So one asking if the meeting was scheduled. So we've created the scenario for when the meeting, was the meeting schedule field is blank, and was the meeting schedule is equal to no, because the same thing happens. We want to hide the fields when the field is blank or when it's equal to no. So it's a better alternative to create this scenario than to create a scenario for when the answer is yes, because we would need to create a different scenario for when it's no. So if the conditionals are true, we want to hide all these fields because we only want them to be displayed when the person answers yes. And if the conditionals are false, so if the person answers yes, we're going to show the meeting date and the field asking whether they have met with the customer. Then our second conditional, it was set up the same way. So we have a conditional that establishes that if did you meet with the customer is blank, or if it's equal to no, we want to hide the field. So hide meeting summary, deal value, and when will the next meeting be. And if they're false, so if the person says yes, they have met with the customer, I'm going to show meeting summary, deal value, and when will the next meeting be. That is it for today's content. Does anyone have any question? Thanks everyone for joining. And if you have any questions or if you have any specific scenarios you want to learn how to implement conditionals in your own processes, feel free to reach out to us via the in-app chat or write to my email that's there on the screen, isabel@pipefy.com. All right, thanks everyone for joining, and I hope to see you all again on our next webinars. See you guys.